There's growing support at the State House for new funding to narrow the achievement gap in public schools, but there's also a gap between different proposals and even the distribution between district schools and charter schools. Those differences are explored in a recent report from the Mass Budget and Policy Center. To explain the report is the co-author, the senior policy analyst from the center, Colin Jones. Thank you very much for being with us, Colin.
Thanks, Chris.
I want to start with, before we get into numbers here, if you have a whole lot of money coming into the schools to close the achievement gap, I mean, what could that mean? What could it do for the kids, actually?
Yeah, there's a lot of difference that we could make with the type of reforms that are being talked about, and I think that it's really important to keep that in mind, that it's not just dollars, it's actually the ability to, let's say, make an after-school program available to all kids who are coming from disadvantaged backgrounds, or it's expanding career-evoked technical programs that have great wait lists across the state. Kids are clamoring to get into these technical programs. They're connected to jobs in the economy, but these buildings are somewhat expensive. The programs need more teachers, those types of things. And then there's the issue of, there's a lot of discussion about, well, we can't deal with the achievement gap until we really deal with poverty. And there's an opportunity to actually put the set of services like health clinics, dental clinics, mental health care, and things like that into the schools directly, so that kids are really not only getting great education, but also getting all the services they need. So hopefully that's a big focus of this reform. It's not just about dollars for dollars' sake. It's about being able to, particularly in places where the need is the greatest, provide the type of program that will allow all kids to reach really high academic standards.
Now, there are some people who maybe aren't as familiar with these stories. They might say, a mental health clinic or a dental clinic in a school doesn't sound very academic. I mean, how could that make a difference in terms of things like test scores?
Yeah, some of it's pretty straightforward. So if a kid is not showing up because of, or they're absent because of issues going on at home, and there's services in the school that can help deal with that, that's going to make a big difference, because you can't learn if you're not there. Or if there's, I was actually a teacher for a number of years, and I had certain students where they were acting out, but it was because of a situation going on with a parent who's in the criminal justice system. And you need a counselor to work through that. And teachers in the classroom don't necessarily have the training to deal with issues of trauma and violence in the community. So those systems aren't always talking to each other. And so I think it's not to say that a school should try to solve everything, but if you have a population that has certain needs and you solve those all in one place, it can really make a difference, and kids will be better able to learn. But on the other hand, you also have to make sure that they're getting great instruction, great teachers. Those things have to come together.
This is BNN News, and we're talking with Colin Jones from the Mass Budget and Policy Center. Colin, getting into the quantities of money here, the governor has a plan. It sounds like he wants to put a lot more money into the schools. And State Senator Sonia Chang-Diaz also has a plan that a lot of other people have signed on to. She wants to put an even larger amount of money. What's the difference between these two for Boston?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to zoom out and sort of say the overall picture. Well, we have our school funding system. It came in 1993 with our Ed Reform Act, but it hasn't been systematically updated in 25 years. So really, this whole conversation has been percolating since 2014 and 2015, when there was a state legislative commission that addressed a bunch of recommendations that were necessary to fix the system. So here we are, and it's actually a good 4 or 5 years later, and we still haven't gotten that deal done. And so there is still a need to update our system. And so that's where, starting in January, at the start of this new legislative session, there was a number of different plans that were out there. And then the purpose of our report that we did last month was to just say, given the plans, one from Governor Baker and then one from Senator Sonia Chang-Diaz and a couple of co-sponsors in the House, Aaron Vega and Mary Keefe from Holyoke and Worcester, they had different approaches for dealing with the same problem. And they did have different price tags. And so we showed that if you look out over its full implementation over 7 years, that Governor Baker's plan would add about $460 million to schools across the state. However, we showed that the other plan, known as the Promise Act, would lead to as much as $1.41 billion in new statewide school aid. And so there's a gap of basically $950 million between these plans. And that's a very significant difference.
And it looks as if under the governor's plan, after 6 years or so, Boston ends up pretty much with what it's getting already.
Yeah, so when it comes to Boston, it's important to remember that Boston is considered a wealthy district under the formula because it's
Good tax base.
yeah, good tax base, high levels of income and property wealth in the city. So it's expected, because of that, just like other wealthy communities and mostly suburbs, it's expected to give a very significant share of its spending requirement is expected to come from the city of Boston. So pretty much 80%. So that's sort of how it's supposed to work. It's supposed to give the system is supposed to give more state aid to the communities who really can't raise revenue and give less to those who have wealth within the community. So the way this works out is actually the city of Boston is getting some aid under the plan called the Promise Act. That's just because it's increasing the support for low-income students. But there's another piece of the Promise Act that involves reimbursing the city for its charter schools, and we showed that the majority of aid that they were getting was from that component. And so that was explaining the difference. So under the Promise Act, Boston got about $90 million when it was fully phased in, where it basically got nothing under the governor's plan because it doesn't have that charter school reimbursement proposal.
Now, one of the tough things in any plan here is that you have students whose families choose charter schools. The money should go with them, but you also don't want to defund the district schools.
Yeah.
How do you? What's the best way? I mean,
So this is definitely a thorny issue. It has been a thorny issue over the past several years, and I think that it's important to kind of separate out components of this. So there's obviously a lot of disagreement on the policies of what charter schools are doing. Are they the right option? Are they enrolling the same kids that are in the neighborhood schools? Those types of things. Those are very contentious and they're unlikely to kind of lead to a lot of agreement. But there is one area of this where the financial aspect of it, where when a kid leaves a district school to go to a charter school, they basically take funding that's equivalent to about the average spending in the district when they go. And the district doesn't necessarily save that much money because think about it, if a class goes from 24 to 23, for instance, you're not saving a lot of money. You're still operating that school, you still have a teacher in that classroom. So districts aren't necessarily saving very much money when those kids leave, and that's created a financial challenge. So to deal with that, we actually have a line item in the state budget that helps districts deal with those transition costs. But the problem is that's been underfunded for a number of years. And so hopefully it's possible I think we have to zoom out and think about the end goal is whether a kid be in a district school or a charter school, that every kid has enough support and resources to be successful. So hopefully we see updating Chapter 70, fixing the components that need more funding like low-income students, English learners students, those types of things, and dealing with charter school reimbursements. If we do those things together, hopefully there's no loser in that scenario, and it really just gets down to how do we raise the funding necessary to do these reforms.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks, Chris.
Colin Jones from Mass Budget and Policy Center. In a moment, helping students close the gap through the power of mentoring.